Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Elena with Napa Bookmine. I am so excited to welcome you all digitally, virtually, on this lovely Tuesday evening to celebrate and discuss the fantastic book now out in paperback, The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. The author is Anna Malaika Tubbs, a multidisciplinary expert on current and historical understandings of race, gender, and equity. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Stanford University with a BA in anthropology, Anna earned her MA in gender studies and her PhD in sociology from the University of Cambridge as a Bill and Melinda Gates Cambridge Scholar. She lives with her husband and their children. Joining Anna in conversation is Holly Hubbard Preston, a freelance journalist for NPR and the NYT's Global Edition, essayist, and most recently published fiction author. Attracted to places and people often overlooked, her work seeks to reveal the universal truths hidden in the shadows of an ordinary life. She is currently seeking representation for What Birds Know, a debut literary novel about human migration inspired by real events. We are so grateful to have you both with us this evening. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let Holly and Anna take it away.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I am so honored to be in conversation with Anna. Anna has been received many awards for this book. This was her debut book as an author, and she debuted this book in February of 2021 when we were all knee-deep in the pandemic. And she also did this as she brought her first child into the world. She has a 2-year-old. Anna has a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. So we're really grateful to you tonight, Anna, to be here with us and to be sharing this wonderful book.
I'm grateful. Thank you for having me.
So, about motherhood, I just wanted to say that when I read this book, when we were talking at the beginning of this, I mentioned to you that for the last number of years, I've made a real effort to, as a writer and an author, to read more Black and Brown authors.
Yeah.
But your book, I have to say, probably cut closest to my heart. Because I think that there's one thing all of us share in common, regardless of our race or our gender. We were all brought into this world by mothers.
Yeah.
And so we have that relatability to our mothers. And for those of us who are mothers, we do have a degree of shared experience there. And I think that your book, for me as a reader, and I'm really excited to talk about it, how you came to write it, the way you wrote it, which is both very professional, but also very personal. You know, what this means for us as the children, readers, as the children of mothers, as mothers, and where we can meet with this book.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm a white author and a mother, and I found this book to be a way into understanding the Black experience, and in particular the Black experience for mothers. These three mothers, yes, these three mothers of very famous men, but also Black mothers in general, and also their humanity. And it also made me really think about my own motherhood, my own womanhood, and how we all stand together. So I just wanted to say right up front that, you know, personally for me, this book was outstanding on many levels, and we'll be able to discuss a little bit how you were able to hit so many levels, at least with this reader. And I would really encourage those of you who have read the book, please ask questions. Those of you who haven't, please do read it. So let's start, maybe, if you're ready, with that reading we talked about on page 102. I think that's a good entry to just talking about Bertus Baldwin, Alberta King, and Louise Little.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Holly, for all of that feedback. It means the world to me and really hit on so many of the goals that I had for the book. I'm all about bringing more people into conversation around topics that can be very uncomfortable, but don't have to be so hard to understand. And hopefully we can meet with human connection and putting experiences and emotions behind the things that we talk about that sometimes feel so large and so difficult to tackle. So that means the world to me. Thank you. So this passage is from page 102 in the book. We cannot understand the Littles, Kings, and Baldwins without understanding African American history, as well as the unique backgrounds of both parents heading the household. Without knowing about Black women's struggle to take control of their ability to have children, one would have a harder time understanding the three women's decisions to have large families. Without knowing about the refusal to allow Black women to be present for their children first and the rest of the world after, it is difficult to understand why each woman accepted the need to put her children and family over her own career. Without knowing the circumstances in which the three sets of parents were raised, we lack important context in understanding the decisions each made in raising their own children. Louise, Bertus, and Alberta give us perspectives that we can use to better understand what Black families across America faced during the 1920s and 1930s. Despite many differences, all three families faced difficulties making ends meet as a result of national economic strains. All three families faced the hardships of dealing with illness, whether physical or mental, with little support outside of their family. The best medical care was kept from Black families, leaving them in a position to hope for the best and worry about the worst without clear answers from doctors. The Littles, Kings, and Baldwins also dealt with racial violence, unable to escape its everlasting grasp on their lives. The families dealt with these factors in unique ways, yet in some form or another, they all addressed the importance of familial unity and passed down what they learned from generations before them. Louise and Earl passed down the importance of self-sufficiency. Alberta and Martin passed down the importance of social justice. And Bertus, more so than David, passed down the importance of love and acceptance for all. Finally, all three families made decisions based on their Christian faith, although their approaches differed widely.
Great, thank you. I picked that selection for everybody who's on because it shows you the range that this book explores. And you can see just from that passage that the Black experience, and certainly the Black motherhood experience, is not singular. And I felt in this book, Anna, that I could experience just different aspects of that experience, different perspectives. So you did a great job with that. One thing all of those mothers in this book, and this was something that hit me up front, was their insistence from the beginning, even before they brought their children into the world, that their lives would matter. Mm-hmm. And that they would have, they would be raised to have agency, and that they would be raised to be self-determined, and that they would raise to have dignity and be recognized, their humanity. And I think those are things, when I said up top, that I think that any mother who's on this, in this forum tonight, those are things that I would certainly insist for my children, want and insist. So we can all relate there. But these mothers, and I think you set this up in the very beginning, had to, fight for that and insisted from the beginning, and right from, birth to death, they all three buried their sons. Mm-hmm. And, had to outlive them, had to carry that insistence with them. So I wanted to speak a little bit about, for you, you found out you were pregnant when you started working on this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As a writer, this would be a very hard book for me to write. It was a hard book for me in places to read. I won't lie, but I had to read through the hard places to get to all the moments of grace that you offered. So you chose in the very beginning to take a personal tact with this, which put you right out there and very vulnerable. What was behind that? Did you always start the book that way, or did you come back to that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So for context, for those who haven't read it, I started writing this book and started this research before I was a mother. I had an incredible mother who I wanted to honor. She was a lawyer who stood for human rights, but very specifically women's rights and children's rights, both in the US as well as abroad. So long before I became a mother, I always revered this role of motherhood and the mothering work, even beyond biological motherhood, and the need to respect that, to really put that on a pedestal, to pay attention to this critical role in our different societies. And so I was doing this research on these three incredible Black women, trying to uncover the truths of their lives, really finding other hidden figures, if you will. I was incredibly inspired by this project that went on to become the film Hidden Figures, written by Margot Lee Shetterly. And then I am expecting my first child. And I was in the middle of the research, so not towards the beginning, but more towards the middle. And I was so afraid. So you have to picture this. I am a Black feminist scholar. I have degrees in gender studies, anthropology, sociology. I'm well aware of the state of Black womanhood, not only now, but all of the atrocities that have led to the state of Black womanhood today, but also very aware of the resistance that Black women have been able to use to push against all of these forces that try to dehumanize us and dehumanize our children. But my initial feeling right after finding out I was pregnant, first saying, wow, it's so exciting, this is what we wanted. And then immediately all of the knowledge that I had, this is going to be actually quite dangerous. And I'm more likely to die as a Black woman in the United States in pregnancy or in childbirth. And if my child survives this, they'll be walking around in the world as a Black child where all of these forces are working against them and do not see them in the way that they deserve to be seen. It was terrifying, but then I remembered, okay, what am I to learn from Alberta, Bertus, and Louise? This timing is so divine. I want to know what lessons they're really teaching me now, very personally, beyond the larger project that I'm completing. What about my motherhood journey is going to be influenced by studying these three women? And the largest lesson, there were several, but the largest that they taught me was my power and my agency. That I didn't have to accept the circumstances as they were, because I couldn't. I had to push to change systems around me. And I also could not allow fear and pain to be the only driving force in my life. That if that were the case, we'd lost the fight, but that I needed to hold on to my love, my joy, and really make sure that that was part of my fight against changing systems that tried to dehumanize me and would try to dehumanize my children. So it was work that I was already doing. I was always, I cared deeply about social justice. I was always doing my part to fight for that. And I think my children just further inspired that in the same way that Alberta, Bertus, and Louise were already change makers in their own right, activists in their own right, shaping the world around them long before they become mothers. And then the fact that they have these children further inspires them to continue that work and then teach their children how to join them in that work as well. So it reminded me not only of my power, but the power of my children, and how so many Black feminist scholars had talked about motherhood as the kind of beginning of a new world, that every time one of our children was born, the world began again. This was a different way of imagining the possibilities of the world. And I think Black mothers have been so visionary in that way because we have always been told by law even that our children were less than other human beings. And we can't accept that. We can't accept that circumstance. And so instead of staying where others want us to stay, we're always saying, look at what's possible. Look how much further we can push our nation. And this is how so much of our kind of history has progressed, because Black women have been unwilling to accept the circumstance as it currently is. And that left me feeling incredibly inspired. It also left me thinking about how I turned that agency and power into action, working with doulas, for instance, having a midwife of color with me, who would listen to me, who would see me as a human being who I am. All of these things just became very clear that I had to hold on to my power more than I ever had before.
We should probably say, I think probably many people here know what it is, but the mortality rate, I mean, we have, for a first world country, one of the highest mother infant mortality rates
across the board.
Across the board. But for Black women,
yeah. I mean, the number honestly changes every year, but I would say there's a range between 3 to 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy or in childbirth, and to experience infant mortality as well.
I was going to say what you said about the idea of children are less. And I think that one thing that this book really does a good job with, it allows the reader, a white reader, Black reader, brown reader, an entry point, non-judgmental, because we are contemporary readers. We did not do these things. We inherited the history for sure, but it allows us an entry point to really understand what it feels like and looks like, and the weight of carrying children, the idea that your children are less. And you take us, Anna goes all the way back, pre-Civil War, and carries us forward to through the lives of these women. And these women really, and we should talk about Alberta and Louise now, because their lives really covered, post-Civil War, coming out of that first generation raised by parents who came post-Civil War through the civil rights movement, into the 70s. So they really covered a very formative part of our history, our recent history. So I'm going to ask you to do something that's really probably not fair to these women, but let's say we were going to a dinner party.
Yeah.
And you were going to introduce me to them. What could you say, kind of in short, about each one of these women to get me ready to meet them?
Oh, I love that. I love that question. I will also say, I mean, they actually span a century of American history.
Yeah.
They are born in the early 1900s. Louise Little's actually, her birthday is, no one knows. There's several different records on this, but between maybe 1897, 1899. But she lives until 1991.
That's right.
And then James Baldwin is born in 1902, and she lives until 1999. Right before the millennium. And then Alberta King, her life was taken early. She was actually shot in the back as she played the church organ in 1974.
I think I was thinking about her death.
Yes,
which
yeah.
we'll come back
I wanted
to.
people to know, like, this is such recent history, right? I talk about Bertis Baldwin quite often, that she overlaps in her life on one end with Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman didn't pass away until 1914. And then on the other end of her life, Bertis Baldwin overlaps with me. I was born in 1992. So for one person to overlap with both Harriet Tubman and with me, this is recent history. It's not that far back. And that was an important part for me, that as we picked up this book, we realized, wow, we were on this earth at the same time as these women. And what does that mean in terms of where we are as a nation today? We have to accept that. We cannot fall for historical amnesia or think that this is ancient, years and years back. And in terms of introducing them, that would be so cool if I had the chance to meet them. I often joke that I was trying to emulate Hidden Figures, except I couldn't interview the women that I was studying. So it was kind of an interesting goal to set for myself. However, I would say with Alberta King, it depends again on the kind of stage of their life that I'd be introducing them to. But the essence of her is that she is raised by the leaders of Ebenezer Baptist Church. So her parents are the ones who established this famous church. So she is like the daughter of Ebenezer Baptist, meaning she believes that Christian faith is always intertwined with social justice. She believes in participating in marches and in boycotts, and she's an early member of the NAACP. And she also achieves a bachelor's degree and a teaching certificate before she meets her husband. So I would say this is obviously a very well-educated person, a leader in her community. She's also a musician an incredible singer. She can play various instruments. So she's just kind of does it all, Alberta King. And definitely someone you would want to know. Her family was rich with social capital. Everyone would have known this family in Atlanta and the South at large, simply for leading this incredible church, but also for prioritizing the education of their only child, Alberta. And we can't take that for granted. For in the early 1900s, a Black woman to have a bachelor's degree, as well as a teaching certificate, as well as wanting to become an educator and be this world-class musician, is really incredible. And it helps us to better understand then how her son has access to so much opportunity. Then when we think about Bertus Baldwin, everyone who knew her spoke about her. So I interviewed some of her children and some of her grandchildren. Love was the biggest thing that always came up for them. She was so full of love and light and optimism. Even though she lived a really hard and difficult life, she always saw the light and the importance of moving past pain, moving past your hatred to find healing and to find progress. She was also an incredible writer. So if you were lucky enough to be close to her, she would gift you letters. She remembered everybody's birthdays, apparently, and never forgot one, even though she didn't keep a calendar. This is what I've been told from her family members. But she would always remember these special occasions and gift someone some of her writing that helped them through their own pain and through their own hardship. So I would say you want to be close to Bertus if you want to receive one of these kind of world-class letters on how to live your life and find healing and progress. And then Louise Little, she was a radical activist. She was inspired by her grandparents, who were liberated Africans, meaning at one point they were enslaved and then they were able to gain their freedom. So they hold tightly onto the importance of Black independence, Black pride, Black self-sufficiency. So this is why Louise cares deeply about knowing how to garden and grow her own food, knowing how to hunt, having her own trade, sewing clothes, doing whatever she needs to do to make her ends meet so that she doesn't have to depend on her white oppressor very specifically. She's also well-educated, she's multilingual, and she's a global scholar. So she leaves Grenada when she's a teenager. She's 17 years old. She boards a steamboat on her own and goes to Montreal, Canada, to join an international Black nationalist movement, which is that of Marcus Garvey. So she is a proud Garveyite, and she writes for their newspaper. So again, another example of someone who making her own strides all on her own. We cannot take this for granted. Early 1900s, she's traveling as a young girl to join an international movement that's all about standing up against white supremacy. So I would say, with Louise, you don't want to waste any time. Get to the point. She is very a leader, doesn't have time to just kind of relax, honestly. She's just more like, let's get this work done. Let's stand up for ourselves. Let's change this world because that change is so needed. So they're three incredibly different women from each other, as you mentioned. And it was really important to me that we not reduce their identity, because usually Black women are not represented, but if they are, we're represented as if we're all the same, as if we're a monolith, as if one thing applies to one of us applies to all of us. And that's not the case. We are incredibly different from each other. And this is where the strengths of our community lie, our different backgrounds, our different experiences, and coming together and supporting one another, and really taking from the strength of that difference. So in this book, I said I cannot reduce them. I want to make sure I highlight how different they are. The thing that brings them together is time, and the fact that they were born within 6 years of each other, and then their famous sons were born within 5 years of each other. So the book progresses through decades of their lives, and they are happening at the same time, but very different things are happening.
Time and insistence.
Yeah. Definitely.
When I think back, that word just kind of stayed with me, that insistence. I mean, yes, resilience, but insistent. I think that for me, of the three men, civil rights leaders, the one that I know and understand the least about prior to reading this book was probably Malcolm X.
Mm.
And I think that what I so appreciated about this book, again, not just about this book and these men and their mothers, but also all mothers and, you know, me as a mother, was looking at Malcolm X and how his experience and the experience of his mother, you know, he was at one end of a spectrum of leadership. Yes, he was the most radical of the three. And, you know, I think we all sort of know that, but we don't really know why.
Right.
And you see from his upbringing, and I think, you know, it should be mentioned here that Louise Little, her husband passed away. She had 7 children, right? 8. And when Malcolm was a little boy, his mother, she was committed to a hospital and for deemed, or they insanity.
Yeah, but I can give the background and the context.
Yeah, why don't you please? Because I think that's important to understand how his mother's experience carried over. Her lack of agency probably helped direct him and where he went with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So both parents, both Earl Little and Louise Little, are Garveyites. So they follow this Marcus Garvey movement. They believe in Black nationalism. They're both radical activists. And so they meet at an organizing meeting, and this is where they fall in love with each other. And because they are so courageous, Garvey actually sends them as a couple to travel across the Midwest to incite this revolutionary spirit of Black nationalism amongst communities that are already fighting back against the KKK and another group called the Black Legion, which is pretty much the KKK. It just goes by a different name. And so this is strategic for them, that they are known by these hate groups, that they want to be agitators, that they're there and they're saying, yes, you should be afraid. Here we are, you know, we've arrived, kind of thing. And so that puts them in danger multiple times throughout their relationship. And they're also bringing their children into the world as they're traveling and creating these waves of activism. So this is happening concurrently. But that means that at times, you know, their house gets burned down. Louise is approached when Earl is out of town and she's at home alone. She's pregnant with Malcolm. She's approached by a mob of white men, and she's standing up against them on her own, seemingly unafraid. It's this kind of like wild moment that you're sort of so terrified for her, but somehow she survives it. And then Earl Little is actually murdered. So he is run over by a streetcar. His body parts are found. And in the newspapers, they deem this an accident. So then they do not give Louise Little life insurance money, or they say that he committed suicide. And this is a reason they're not going to support her, even though she's a widow, first of 7. And then she has another child in a different relationship, becomes a mother of 8. So she's a single mother of 8. But again, she's a proud Garveyite, meaning she wants to have self-sufficiency. She wants to continue to own her own property. But for a woman to do this at this time, let alone a Black woman, let alone a Black immigrant woman, this was really viewed as something very non-traditional and really not something that they wanted to accept. So white welfare workers start entering her home without permission, saying she doesn't know how to raise her children. She's telling them crazy things. Why would she want to put these ideas about revolution in their minds? And then a white male physician is sent to evaluate her. And he asks her certain questions, and he concludes that Louise is experiencing dementia. And there's a doctor's note that I include in the book where he says that she is, this is a quote, imagining being discriminated against. This is a Black immigrant woman in the Midwest, and he says she is imagining being discriminated against. That is enough to put her away in an institution against her will for around 25 years of her life. So throughout history, if you have heard about Louise Little, you probably heard, oh, it's so sad she went crazy. That's not what happened. This was a clear attack against her as an outspoken activist who knew what she believed and would not bow down. And even in the doctor's notes to the state where they're asking, should she stay for longer? Can her kids come visit her, et cetera? They're writing things like, she continues to resist us. She continues to resist, which for me really reminds me a lot of nevertheless, she persisted kind of thing. But after 25 years of being in this institution, her family continues to fight for her release. She interprets this as an incarceration of her. She is released and she goes on to live for another 25 years, never showing any of the symptoms that they said she was needed her to be in this institution.
Well, she had, I guess, one year left with Malcolm when she was out before he was assassinated.
1 year. Mm-hmm.
Let's go talk a little bit about the book itself, because I know that as hopefully some people will read the book after this conversation, I go back and revisit it. Of the passages that you wrote, I mean, there's just it's Women's History Month, and there is just a lack of an absence of scholarship for women in this country in general. So now you have the absence of scholarship for, Black women over history. And, you do a good job of balancing giving a very personal human perspective on these people, these three women. But you also back that up with documentation. There's an index in the back. When I would wonder, this is the journalist in me, I think, where'd she get that from? I would go back and find it. So it was there. I'm wondering, where were your sources? Where were sort of the treasure troves that you found, or, how did you compensate for that lack of information?
Yeah.
Because, we're talking about erasure, and, you're re-enlivening these women on the page, and you did bring them to life on the page. So how?
Thank you. I appreciate that question so much, because I am fortunate that people have loved reading the book in the sense that it tells a good story and they enjoy the book. But then I think they forget that this was mostly original research, like 90% of it. And I remind people also, I didn't just say I'm going to write a book and this will be interesting. This was the subject of my PhD dissertation. So it needed to be well researched. I wouldn't have become a PhD without that. And so it was incredibly difficult. And I'll just kind of talk through maybe an example for one woman, the many different sources that I had to find to even figure out the beginning of her life and kind of how I started. So my entry point for all three of them was the famous son. This is actually one of the reasons I chose Mothers of Famous People, because again, I was a sole researcher, PhD student. I didn't have a bunch of assistants working with me. It was just Anna. And I said, okay, I'll start with them. I'll go through all of their works, and anytime they've mentioned their mothers or give any context on their mothers, thank God for Control F and modern technology. So I didn't have to read the entire book, but I could find where it said mother, or where it said Louise, or where it said, one of their names. And then took from anything that was written about the sons, so experts in those sons, and searched those things as well. So I started to form timelines for all three of the women. From there, I started to see where my clear gaps were. For those scholars and even the men themselves, it seems like the women didn't matter until they gave birth to the son. So what was happening way before that. And so I called the scholars who were experts in the sons. I said, do you have any archives that would be letters where they mentioned the mothers, or letters to the mothers, or letters from the mothers, or even siblings talking about the mothers? And some of them did. They said, yeah, people haven't really asked for this before, but sure, we'll share them with you. So one scholar, one professor, I should say, Garrett Felber, worked directly with Manning Maribel, who wrote one of the other leading biographies on Malcolm X. And he had kind of piles of letters where Malcolm X is talking about his mother, where he's crediting her with his reason for wanting to join the Nation of Islam, where he's saying all of our accomplishments are our mom's, that mom taught us all of this long before, that moment where we all think Malcolm X becomes Malcolm X. Instead, he sees it as a homecoming to her. So this was really incredible. Then the King Center in Atlanta say, we don't necessarily want to do any interviews with you, but we will share our archives with you. So they're walking through archival data with me for Alberta King. With Bertus Baldwin, I call local historians in this tiny town of Deal Island, Maryland. So I'm on the phone trying to get a hold of people. Sometimes I visit the locations where the women are born, but also this is starting to coincide with developments of the pandemic. So I had to stop traveling as much as I wanted to, but I was able to go to Atlanta. I was able to, again, call the local historians. They helped me find birth certificates, death certificates, land deeds, again, not only for the three women, but their family members. So for example, Bertus Baldwin doesn't show up in any census data. She was never on the census. Again, all of you, whenever they're telling us to fill out the census, please do it. It not only helps with current funding, it also helps future people keep track of our lives. But her sister did, and her parents did. I knew from James Baldwin's writing that his mom called her sister the only mom she knew. So I find her mother's death certificate, and it says that her mom died the same month and year that Bertus was born. So now this makes sense. She didn't know her mother because her mother might have passed away either in childbirth or childbirth complications. Speak about, the Black maternal health crisis. But Bertus calls her sister her mother. I then find that her father remarried. So there's like a marriage certificate that comes up in my research. And I then have to look and see that traditionally at this time, if the father remarried, his children might move in with older siblings, and then he might start a life again. So she moves in with Beulah, her sister. Thank goodness her sister does show up on the census data. So I know where she lived. I know that she actually owns some land. And then I can map when Bertus leaves Deal Island, Maryland, and goes to New York. But everything I just told you for Bertus and the many different sources, that's maybe a paragraph that I can tell you.
Yeah.
Her mother passed. She was with her father at some point, but then moves in with her sister. And this is an entire book. So it was incredibly difficult. And again, I've been very spoiled by good reviews, but the few who don't like it have said they wanted more information. And I'm like,
Not there.
yeah. If
Yeah.
it's there, please help me find it. And it shouldn't be the only book we ever write about these women. That was never my intention. I believe each woman deserves her own biography, but this is what I could find as a PhD student. And to say that I've uncovered as much as I could in this amount of time, but more people should join me in valuing these three women's lives. I did not make a mistake in the subtitle when I said they shaped our nation. A lot of times people switch that and say they raised sons who shaped the nation. I am saying long before they became moms, they were shaping our nation, and they deserve to be studied to the same extent, quite honestly. So I hope I'm not the only one who writes about that. I hope more people come up and say, Anna missed this important information. That would make me so happy if we continued to find evidence of these women's lives.
Well, that's what I like about, that's what I really appreciated about this book. It's like motherhood on steroids, these three, because of what they're up against. And when you read the book, you see it. You see what they're up against because of their personal circumstances, because of who they married, of where they live, of where they come from, of their legacy. But you really see that. And I think what the book does a service to all mothers with is it makes you think about that through line from a child to, from a mother to a child.
Yeah.
Whether it's a daughter or a son. I have 2 daughters and 1 son, and they're here somewhere on this. But there's a through line there, and we do make a lot about there's been so much written about the absent father story in, the stories of Black leaders, white leaders, brown leaders, men, mostly, but we don't hear about the present mother so much.
James
So I think you did. This is like another reason to recommend this book. I want to talk a little bit about Alberta King, because I'm going to there's a lot I don't know. And this book reminded me of that. I was very humbled. Again, like every time I read a book like this, I'm very humbled. But I didn't know that Alberta King was assassinated in the Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1974. And that was really like, I knew how her son's story ended.
Right.
I also didn't know that her other son, AD, drowned. And
Yeah.
there's some question about how he drowned. Only her daughter lived, and her daughter was in the church that day that she was killed. And you don't mention her killer. He was mentally ill, a Black man by the name of Marcus Wayne Chenault Jr.
Yeah, Chenault, I think.
He was 21 years old, and he had I guess he said that he was going to shoot Christians, which was, so sad in that church. And you think about, for her with her husband watched on, and she was what, by that time, in her 70s?
She was born in 1902. So yeah, she was 72.
Yeah. So it was tragic. And I didn't know about that. And I have asked numerous people if they knew about Alberta's death. And everyone said, what do you mean she was shot? And I don't know, just the fact that we don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That oversight. And, we recognize Martin Luther King now. I think we all do, or more of us are. But, it's important to recognize her. So thank you for that, because that was one of many things I learned in your book. And I felt sorry that I didn't know that. So thank you. I'm looking at our time. We're going to be coming up on questions here. Just a little bit about takeaway from this book. When you sat down to write this book, who did you imagine sitting across from you first? And then how did that change?
Sitting across from me reading it?
Yeah, when you started writing it, when we write, we often sort of imagine a reader or maybe a few readers. And I'm wondering who you imagined at first, and then if it ever changed.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. As I was writing it, I carried so many different people in my heart. And that might be because of my background of having moved so many times growing up and been around the world. And my goal of people coming and reading this book, no matter their background or their experiences. Actually, even when I sold the book, the different editors I was speaking to, the editor who I did end up working with, Bryn Clark, who is incredible, she asked me, who do you view as the audience of this book? Like, who should pick up this book? And I said, anyone who has a mother or had one. This book really is for everybody. But I was very, very intentional, especially for every Black woman who would pick up this book. I wanted to make sure that they would be proud of me, that they would feel seen, that they would feel respected, that they would feel represented with the dignity, again, and the respect that we deserve and we are not afforded. When we are represented, like I said before, it is such a reduction of our identity. And I needed at every page and at every turn, I wanted Black women to say, I'm seen and I'm celebrated here. And then for everybody else to say, what can I do to support the Black women in my life? What can I do to correct these histories of violence? This dehumanization, what is left to do that could have been helpful for Alberta, Bertus, and Louise? If we're still not doing it, then let's start doing it now. And I think if you just take each one of them and just think of examples in their lives of things that could have made their lives better and easier. Yes, they still lived incredible lives, but it could have been so much easier. And imagine how much more they could have done if some of these barriers had been lifted, if some of this weight had been shared. And so I think it really is a book for everyone. I did picture it that way. I'm beyond grateful that people from all different walks of lives have received it and have supported it and have felt, maybe for the first time, I'm understanding what Black people are talking about because of this identity of motherhood. I now feel almost safe to explore some of these topics because of this unifying message of motherhood. I can't tell you how many white men especially have said, I loved your book. I love my mom. Thank you for
Mhm.
reading this. And I never thought about how influential my mother was. I knew she was important to me. I knew I loved her, but I didn't think about how her passions, her talents, her skills translated into mine, translated into my career. And now I need to go back and give her credit for that. And so I think it just gives us, and like you said, for mothers of all different walks of life, whether it's biological motherhood or all the different ways in which we mother, teachers are mothers in a lot of ways, our caretakers are mothers in a lot of ways, have said, when I walk through as much as I can by the side of Alberta, Bertus, and Louise, I now better understand they would do anything for their children to be treated with the dignity that they deserved. I now understand. So I'm so full of gratitude. I was really worried that in writing a book about women who were erased, that maybe people wouldn't pick up this book and it would be like another product of another Black woman's voice being erased, that being mine. So thankful. And I mean, as you know, you're an author. There are incredible books that come out every year, and people they don't pay attention to them. They may never know they existed. So I worked incredibly hard. I've done so many book talks, and with every audience, I express such gratitude because we are keeping their names alive and we're changing the narrative. And I am thankful for everyone who steps into this journey with me, and does this work with me. So thank you all who are here tonight.
Before we go to questions,
Yeah.
I have wanted to ask you about your mother, because she was a human rights attorney, lawyer, and you lived around the world. So you actually were able, I will say to the audience that Anna has lived outside of the country as well as in it. So, there's that additional perspective you bring, where you can do a gut check about, where we are different as a society from others, and, and temper your view and stand back. And you do a good job with that. But I also thought about, you were raised by a woman who was a human rights attorney. And I think the thing that is consistent on every page of this book is the humanity, is humanity. I'm just wondering, your mother, I think she passed away recently.
She did.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
How did she feel about it? And how did she, just to honor her, because she is your through line, how did she shape this book?
In every possible way. Yeah. Like I said, long before I was a mother, I knew to give my mom credit. So I was always aware that mothers are, like I said, powerful, influential, the most important figures. And that's not for me to glorify motherhood. I know that there are many people who don't have good relationships with their mothers. So I'm not trying to discredit that. And I acknowledge that is an experience. And to think about still, though, this person influenced you in some way, shape, or form, regardless of it being a positive or negative relationship. I'm grateful that I had a very positive relationship with my mom. We were best friends. And that I had this year of having a book out before she passed, where I was constantly shouting her out. I had no idea. It was a pretty unexpected end of life, but every day I was, like I said, doing book talks. I was on TV. I was writing articles. So I was just shouting out my mom all over the place. And it gave me such a gift that I know when she passed, she knew how much she mattered to me and how much of an influence she was on my life. And through my work, I'm always close to her. And I know she's proud of that. And I 100%, her career, like I said, her passions, her talents, all these things that I say in more general terms, I'm just relating to my very specific experience. I know I care deeply about women's rights because my mother did. I know I believe that change can happen in this world because my mother did. I should also mention my mother was a white woman and she was an incredible ally. She, from the moment I was born, and as far as I can remember, through various different lessons, told me the following: I don't know what it's like to be a Black woman. She never tried to tell me she knew what it was going to be like to be in my shoes. And that's essential for allies. Do not tell us you know what it's going to be like to be in our shoes. But she said, I believe that you deserve to be treated with, again, dignity, respect, the humanity. And I want to do my part to make this world worthy of you. And I will walk by your side. I will learn with you, and I will stand with you. It's that simple. That is what we're asking for from allies. And my mom was an incredible one. So on every level, she was amazing. I'm grateful that she was mine.
Well, you gave us in this book a place to meet and to learn and to walk together and to share that experience. So thank you so much. And we'll open it up for questions. Elena.
Okay. So now that we're all crying, thank you for that, Anna and Holly. There are a couple of comments in the chat box that are really lovely. Anna, if you have a chance to see those. Nobody has yet put in a question, so we'll give people a couple minutes. If you're not able to access the chat box, they're really, there we go. It starts.
Thank you, Susan.
Susan, thank you. Anna, as a writer, researcher, mother, did you relate personally to one mother over the others? And if so, why?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I have to say no, not one more than the other, but I do think there's certain elements that I relate to for all three of them. So I'll talk a little bit about that. With Alberta, definitely the sense that she had a privilege of education and knowledge. All of the men in her family went to Morehouse. All of the women went to Spelman. I already mentioned they had this social capital, but she believed that if you had privileges like this, that you used them to advance causes forward for an entire community. It's not just for you to hold on to on your own. It's not for you to say, look at me, I'm better than everyone else. And I clearly had access to this. You know, I have 3 degrees. I'm one of few Black women in the world with a PhD, and it's not for me. It's so that I can do my part and use this as a tool to advance us all forward towards more equity and social justice. So I definitely relate to Alberta in that sense and that mindset. With Louise Little, her global experience is one that I relate to a lot. She was really passionate about making sure her children knew that these fights were happening all over the world and they were not alone, that they were part of this kind of larger global team, and having that understanding of what's happening in the world and not being so myopic on the United States is something I care deeply about as well. And making sure that my children are aware of what's happening all around the world is important to me. And then with Bertis Baldwin, her optimism, it's something that I also hold near to my heart, is having hope, not feeling like it's all doom and gloom, but believing that you can confront the pain and face it and face the hatred in order to find light and in order to find that progress. And so I hope to help more people see some of these ugly truths in our history, but not so that we can't move forward, but because it's the only way that we'll be able to move on.
I have a question just I wanted to ask you, is that if you could have expanded this book or were to do a sequel, other mothers that you might have included. Now I'm thinking personally about Mamie Till Mobley, Emmett Till's mother, particularly given what happened last week with the Senate passing after 200 attempts, the Emmett Till anti-lynching law finally passed. I know that his family still wants other justice, but I thought about her because she's certainly a leader of a famous boy, sadly.
And she is somebody actually that I talk about quite a lot, rather in articles or in the chapter. I think it's Losing Our Sons, where I start with her story, and the way in which our country has really expected Black women to turn their tragedy into something so much larger, and almost like rethinking her and thinking about that initial pain. Again, that she was a human being, and what she did for all of us was beyond incredible. And we also have to remember her humanity, because I almost feel like a lot of people interpreted her decision for Emmett to lay in an open casket almost as if she was like superhuman and had this superhuman strength. She was a human being who was going through the most intense pain of her life, yet still she did this for our nation. And this is what Black women have done time and time again. When I'm speaking about other people sharing this weight with us, this is a person who really could have used the support and the help of people around her and turning that admiration of her into actual action.
You handle that very well in the book. And I think that it's an opportunity to revisit that, to see her humanity, you know, and how difficult that was for her to do that. So it was very good. Any other questions, Elena?
There's nothing in the chat box, so I just wanted to open it up and say you're welcome to unmute yourself if you wanted to ask a question before we end tonight, if the chat box is not your preferred method of communication. I'll give it a couple of seconds here, see if anyone pops up. I am not seeing anyone. Oops, somebody did. Yeah, go for it. You can turn on your video if you want to, but you don't have to.
Yes, I was just wondering, did you, what type of information did you find out about Louise's little life, after Malcolm was murdered? What was her life like up until her death? Where did she live? Do you know any of those things?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And that's all. I think probably I'm always trying to remember the chapters. It's all a blur in my head, but it is towards the last chapter. I think it's the second to last chapter. She goes on to live for another 25 years, and she starts to meet all of her grandchildren who she missed out, on their births, etc. And spends a lot of time with her children who are still alive. And I'm trying to remember the state exactly. I want to say it's like the Grand Rapids, maybe Michigan, where one of her daughters has started her own like self-sustaining community, and they like garden their own food and hunt their own food, and she lives there, and it's kind of this Black run group, and she passes away there, and they spread her ashes there as kind of a final symbol of her release into freedom in 1999. But she does become a lot more private once she's released from the institution. So she's not writing, for the newspaper anymore. She doesn't ever give comment on what happens to Malcolm X. A lot of the family members don't attend the funeral, as we know, for Malcolm X. So I think by that point, of course, she's maybe pretty tired of all of the work that she's done and wants to pass on the lessons that she passed to her children now to the next generation. So her grandchildren, especially in the case of Betty and Malcolm's kids, know her better than Malcolm ever did.
There's a question that came up that I was going to ask. Elena, do you see that down there from Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah. And Sarah
Great
popped
question.
up on the screen, so I was wondering if she wanted to ask it herself. If not, I'm happy to read it. Go for it, Sarah.
Oh no, hi.
Hi,
Hi, Anna. Thank you for this. It's been incredible. I was wondering in your research if there was something that you discovered along the way that was the most surprising or shocking to you, or almost caused you pause and you almost had to like take a break from writing, something that you didn't think that you were surprised to discover.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at every turn, everything I'm discovering, I am shocked that we don't know, in like our kind of common knowledge and shared knowledge, because we revere these men so much, and the qualities that we revere them for, in these three cases, they directly inherited from their mothers. Like, it was shocking that we didn't already know that Burtis Baldwin was a writer, for instance, that we didn't already know that everything that Malcolm X stood for, Louise Little stood for, that we didn't know that MLK Jr. inherits the church actually from his maternal lineage. Like, all of these things that are like, clearly we're erasing women's stories and women's impact simply because we want to keep up this notion that men are the only heroes of our story. So everything was pretty shocking to me. I'd say the most kind of gut-wrenching one was Louise Little being put in an institution for 26 years or around 25 years of her life. Like, that is just almost so hard to comprehend what she must have experienced. And if you do any research on these kinds of institutions at this time in American history, these are not nice places. These are not, they're experimenting on people. So to be a Black immigrant woman, what she must have experienced is just really scary and really sad. But most of it, honestly, I had all of these moments, and my husband can tell you, he would come back and I was like, it was my investigative journalist year where I had all my newspapers and I had like my poster boards and my Post-its that I was hanging everywhere in question marks. And he would come home and I'd say, did you know that this is like, how did we not know this? Did you know that even Burtis Baldwin is buried next to James Baldwin? That this was one of James Baldwin's dying wishes, that his mother be buried next to him. She has 9 children altogether, and she's buried next to James Baldwin. They have a shared plaque, and it says Baldwin in the middle, Burtis in one corner, James in the other. If this wasn't a testament to him telling us who mattered most in his life, and we ignored it, scholars and historians ignored that, it's shocking. It hurts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we can all come away from this with just such an appreciation of the work you're doing, Anna, to elevate and illuminate these lives that have really been not just lost, but erased and taken from us. I was a history major myself in college, so I can't help but almost get chills when someone like you, Anna, is doing this work and unearthing all of this information, again, from stuff that was not that long ago. You know, I was born in 86.
Yeah.
They were alive. This is real. History is real. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any last moments from either of you, Anna or Holly, before we end tonight?
I am so grateful to all of you, again, for joining me in this journey of knowing these women's stories and keeping their stories alive. I appreciate your time on this evening. And Holly, thank you so much for such incredible and thoughtful questions. And Susan, for inviting me to do this.
Well, thank you to everybody. And I think we should do a big thank you to Napa Bookmine, because booksellers have a hard job just in the day-to-day work of selling books, particularly in this marketplace. The wonderful thing now is that there are more books out and coming out every day from a diverse, just a range of voices that weren't represented even 2 years ago. But it's a lot of work, and really appreciate this programming. Thank you for inviting me to be a host interviewer. And please support Napa Bookmine. You can order your book online if you haven't already. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, the book is for sale. We have them in all 3 of our stores. We ship anywhere within the continental US. Please support your local independent bookstore. If we're not your local, find your local and visit them. Support Anna and her work and all of the important authors that are working today. Thank you, everyone, so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.